fake leaves, and it is a treat to join this group. And when you're mentioning all these things with Meijer on them, I'm thinking we have a family business consultant who works with us a little bit, and he shared a book that he had co-authored where there's a town where everything is named Smith this, Smith this, Smith this, and the next generation comes along and somebody says to the younger generation, what are you going to do? I'm going to move. Where do you go from there? And so I love Grand Rapids too much, so that's not in the cards. I also don't want to take credit for things that belong to prior generations. Leeds was so gracious, and he said, well, how do you combine business activities with writing and research of a biography? And the answer is that the book has not come out yet, and I've been working on it for 18 years. So that's probably not an example of effective leadership in literary production, so I'm going to jump around a little bit today. I had the pleasure of Mandy passed along the website for all of the prior speakers in this series, and so I come humbled and intimidated by what you all have been fortunate enough to share earlier, and there have been so many good observations about what leadership is that as I was trying to think of what to write, it was very difficult to avoid falling into cliches, and so I figured the only way I could avoid that was to not write a speech and just have very short notes. And I would love to have time to chat with all of you if you have questions or thoughts later on. I brought along very low-tech visual aids today. If you recall how windy it was when you came in here, probably wasn't the best day to be trying to bring billboards across the parking lot, so I nearly didn't make it. But I noticed in President Haas's talk with this group, you talked about being a lifelong learner. And as I said earlier, I've just only had a chance to talk with a couple of students today, but there's a facet of lifelong learning that I think also goes unrecognized in some respects, and that's that it keeps you feeling young. I mean, even as I get in older middle age, as long as you can feel like you're a student or a disciple or a mentee of someone else, you feel young. You're still learning. You haven't reached some plateau in life where learning has stopped. As long as you can do that, I think it's the best medicine for youth imaginable. And we talk a lot about Ralph Hauenstein, and I have to give Ralph credit for some of that too, because Ralph, for a lot of people in this room, I suspect, has been that kind of mentor. And I know he was for me, and as I talk about some of the faces behind me today, Arthur Vandenberg there were once two big daily newspapers in Grand Rapids, the Grand Rapids Press and the Grand Rapids Herald, and he was the editor of the Grand Rapids Herald. After he went to the Senate, the city editor of the Grand Rapids Herald, the job he had once held earlier in his career, was Ralph Hauenstein. So Ralph, in the 1930s, before his distinguished military service and his business career, as a young man out of school, was in the footsteps of one of the people we'll be talking about today. But I wanted to just touch on thinking about the ingredients of leadership as I've experienced it and as I've both researched it and come to know it. Certain things come to mind that are maybe characterized a little more strongly in some individuals than in others. And for me, among those, and I think first of all of something that so many of us have in common, and that is the experience of ancestors who were risk takers. They were whether they were thrust into or sought extremes of challenge and difficulty, whether through poverty or immigration or whatever it might be, leadership cannot succeed without that willingness to take risks. And so I've got a fellow here who's pictured only in his old age, but this is my grandfather, Hendrik Meijer, in both these outside pictures. Came from the Netherlands as a young man, didn't have any idea what he wanted to do, but was willing to take a risk on dislocation, moving somewhere new. Megan was sharing with us at lunch talking about an interest in international relations. That involves risk-taking. You move to a new place and embark on new experiences that way. I don't know how else you begin to groom yourself for leadership. In the early 1930s, in the depths of the Depression, this guy was a barber in Greenville. And he had taken a big risk to come to this country, but then once here, after trying a lot of different things, he had settled into kind of a routine life. But then the Depression came along. And how relevant it is for experiences for people today. In the Depression, people did not need haircuts. That was a luxury that could be disposed of pretty quickly when it came against eating or shelter or something else. You didn't need to go to the barbershop, or at least not as frequently. He had to figure out how to support his family. He had this wise idea, because again, this was before Social Security, and he was a self-employed barber, he had no pension or anything, that he would build a little storefront next door to his barbershop, and he would rent it out and enjoy that income when he was too old to cut hair. Couldn't find anybody to rent the space. So what is he going to do? He owes the bank, those times, and this may be a relative measure of how we're in a deep recession, but not yet a Great Depression. The bank did not want to foreclose. They couldn't, if they could get just a little bit of payment from him, they were better off getting that than taking over worthless real estate. And so he needed to generate some income. So he knew nothing about the grocery business. But in the Depression, just like in this recession, people had to eat. And so he had a couple of barbershop customers who could say, well, I think he's crazy, he doesn't know anything about this business, but he'll do his best to pay you back. And so he borrowed enough money to get a load of $338 worth of groceries, put it in this storefront, and with my dad working and my sister coming in after school, they were in high school then in 1934, and with my grandmother working as well, they were able to begin to make a go of this grocery store. That, to me, exemplified risk-taking. And he was taking on something about which he knew nothing, but desperate times were forcing him to try something new. And then that risk-taking continued because in 1962, my grandfather, and now with my dad, opened the first. Anyone who's a Hauenstein fellow has no business remembering the name Thrifty Years. So you instantly age yourself for those who know that name. But that was what that first store was called. Didn't want to call it Meijer because it was something different. Meijer was just a bunch of smaller supermarkets, and so had to connote this vast space that was selling not only food but apparel and hardware and sporting goods and toys and all these different things. And so they came up with this clever name, Thrifty Acres. Now, I grew up with this when I was a kid, had to listen to Shifty Fakers and all kinds of other things. They were not as inspiring. But this was the store that many of you will recognize at 28th Street and Kalamazoo Avenue. They had no clue what they were doing. Once again, they bet the whole company on this new adventure. If they'd been sufficiently rational about it, they might not have tried it, but they felt that it was, no, seriously, they felt that it was right. And in fact, I was talking with my dad just in the last day or so, because he still comes into the office almost every day. He's 89 years old. And he was likening it to, was it the explorer Cortez, who when he landed said, I'm going to burn the ships. We're here, we're going to make it work. They didn't mean to burn the ships, but they were kind of doing that. They were borrowing more money than they could possibly hope to repay if this thing didn't work, opening 3 big stores in the space of about a year that were bigger than all the little grocery stores combined. They had about 10 of them at the time. And so it was really difficult.